Hey everyone, it's Paul here. I just want to take a few minutes to go over a few things that have been being asked about the Chief Petty Officer's Guide. I had the privilege and opportunity to write about starting about 2 years ago. So um, as the book gets introduced and makes its way around and gains some visibility within the Chiefs Mess and others, getting some questions about it, and I thought I'd share the story behind writing this thing, or the second edition of it. So, as many of you, or some of you may know, I started on my journey writing probably about 4 or 5 years ago. Started with, I was typically writing in base newspapers when I was Command Master Chief. And then when I get to the Naval Safety Center, a discussion with the Colonel, Glenn Butler there, who was the deputy, he got into encouraging me to write for Proceedings magazine. So that's when I got turned on to this journey of writing, and had some articles published, won some essay contests, and from that point, I joined the U.S. Naval Institute's editorial board, and then they approached me to write the second edition of the Chief Petty Officer's Guide. So the first edition had been out, which some of you or many of you may have, since it was published in 2004. By then, it was one of our MCPONs, John Hagan, and another author, co-authored, John Leahy, who had served in the Navy too as a second-class petty officer. And I had seen that out and about, but by the time I was a chief or saw the value of it, frankly, a lot of the content had been surpassed, right? Policies had changed, resources had changed, so clearly it needed an update. The Naval Institute realized that, and they approached me to write it. So what a great opportunity to kind of rewrite the thing. So that's how that opportunity came around, and it started, during my time I was writing on my own time at Fleet Forces, putting this, I was the Fleet Master Chief at Fleet Forces, putting this thing together. So the first thing I had to do is figure out, okay, what do I want to put in this thing? What do I want to organize? How do I want to organize it? What needs to be brought forward from the old one? And how do we make it a relevant guide? So I went into the process thinking about that. How do I keep it, number one, relevant to modern Chief Petty Officers, and frankly, a broader audience than that too. So I felt that the guide wasn't just for Navy Chief Petty Officers. The guide was for, those petty officers, first classes, maybe senior second classes that we know have the potential or are interested in becoming a chief petty officer. They're also a target audience of the book. And then the other audience also is the wardroom, right? So a lot of what I write about, I don't write it necessarily at chiefs or talking specifically to chiefs, but a lot of it is about chiefs, about the value and belief systems and the expectations of chief petty officers. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the content I built in there. So as I went into it, that's how I kind of framed it, and I was figuring out how to organize it. I'm a fan of power, base, and influence tactic theory, and a discussion with, frankly, a buddy of mine, Glenn Mallow, that some of you may know. We were having lunch, and then it all came together that every mantra that the Chiefs Mess operates under, Ask the Chief, speaks to some power base, and that one speaks to expert power, character, and other things. So I said, hey, I'll just align it. I'll use a power and influence model that I've got framed out, and I'll align it to that. So that's kind of how it took form. I pulled a lot of content from the first one that was kind of relevant, right? But this was organized differently. It was organized around the concept of leading, developing, supporting, and communicating. That was kind of key in the early 2000s. So unfortunately, there wasn't a Word document, so I had to hand jam a lot of the new stuff or a lot of the old content that I brought forward. But as I reorganized it, that's how it took form. Like I said, I mentioned about power bases and influence tactics. And the other thing I want to make sure is it's aligned to our leadership development framework. So, what then was CPO 365? What was things being discussed there? I tried not to make it focus on policies and instructions and a lot of things that you guys already have access to online. So as you follow each chapter, it starts out with, hey, let's talk about the belief systems and the value systems and the expectations of chief petty officers, because before you can influence, you got to understand those behaviors. And then I go through the power, the model of power bases and influence tactics. And then we go through each one, right? So the next chapter is going to be about CPO positional power and how that evolved. So a little bit of the history of the chief and how you use your positional power and how you don't misuse your positional power. And then we get into expert power, right? So I talked there a lot about, hey, how you build expert power over a career, and then get into a lot about technical management skills that was lacking in that guide. I had grown up, when I was a young chief, I did a book called Management Fundamentals for Senior Chief and Master Chief Petty Officer. That was outdated, so I actually went back and found an old online version of it and pulled a lot of that content as well, because I felt that we needed to really talk about leaders, or not just leadership skills and leadership approaches, but management skills as well that are so crucial to be an effective Chief Petty Officer. And then, a section on personal power, right? So this is where I talk about ethics, using personal power, and how to shape climate as a Chief Petty Officer, not just command climate, but your divisional climate as well. And then Carrots and Sticks is a chapter about using reward power and coercive power. And then I got into leading, mentoring, and developing our reliefs, connection power through the GOAT locker, and how we hold each other accountable as Chief Petty Officers, or should. And then finally, and then the next chapters that was built that wasn't in anything, and that very little literature was written about, was developing and supporting the wardroom. And I thought it was important to talk about. We talk a lot about training division officers, supporting the wardroom, but little's been written about that. So I threw down my thoughts and the thoughts I've heard from other chiefs going forward. And then finally, a chapter on leading yourself, and then it closes out with some appendices going for, at the end of it. Another piece of the organization was I aligned it to, I had facilitated as a facilitator for Fleet CPO training team. So I like the flow of it. So to some degree, it tries to mimic the flow of Fleet CPO training sessions that some of you or many of you may have gone through. So once again, it was important for me for this to not just be a standalone guide, but something that realigned and reinforced, or aligned with and reinforced, the content and the things you're hearing, and the leadership and management education you get on active duty. One of the big things there, you'll see it's not just Paul Kingsbury talking at you going, hey, here's the way you operate as a Chief Petty Officer. Some of my insights are there. A lot of it's the experiences, and you're talking 31 years of the Navy. So I've seen chiefs mess from the junior sailor perspective, within the chief's mess, and then obviously from the top down. I've had many conversations with officers, junior enlisted, later in my career. So a lot of those perspectives help shape the way the book is written. A lot of the discussions I had with fellow chiefs over a cup of coffee, watching them operate was crucial to me. But at the end of it's really a tool of self-reflection for you guys. So I wrote it. It's got, it's not very long. Each chapter is pretty short. It covers a few points, and then at the end there's these questions that I think are the most important part. And throughout it, there's some boxes for self-reflection, right? So that's the biggest value of it. It's a tool for your own self-reflection. Not just individually as a chief, but to drive a conversation within each of individual chief's mess to help you guys get better and to assess, hey, am I good in this area? Do I need improvement, or do I excel in this area? And I think those questions you'll find are really important and help tee up some great conversations. So the book is out there. Right now it's really available only online. So if you want to get it, because I get questions, hey, how do I get a hold of it? So you can go on the Naval Institute website. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble. You just do a quick search for the Chief Petty Officer's Guide, 2nd edition. It should come up. And then if you got applicable discounts, for example, if you're a member of the U.S. Naval Institute, that the list price, there's a pretty steep discount there for you. If you're Barnes & Noble, there's a discount, and other ones as well. We're working with the Navy Exchange now to get it on the shelves of the Navy Exchange. You can help with that, right? So if you want to see it or you want to get one, you can go to your local Navy Exchange and go, hey, can we get a copy of this in the uniform shop or wherever they hold their professional books? So going forward, frankly, once I got this one written, I quickly saw that a lot of this content is although it's fundamental and it applies to chiefs, I think it has great application to petty officers as well. So I've got a co-author, One Dan Richard. We are writing the Petty Officer's Guide now, version of this. So we took a lot of that fundamental leadership and management topics, rolled that in the Petty Officer Guide, built up on a few of those chapters. So, built a distinct chapter for communication skills, safety, leadership, and risk management, and some other things that are a little different and targeted towards them as well. So I'm excited for that to come out. Should be out in the spring of 2020. So we'll have that continuum built on our side of Blue Jackets Manual, Petty Officer's Guide, and then Chief Petty Officer's Guide. And then frankly, in a few years, I'll get feedback from the Chief's Mess, and we'll evolve this even more and elevate the discussion into higher advanced management leadership concepts that you'll need, not just as a chief petty officer, but as a senior chief or a master chief who works at the highest levels of the Navy. So that's where you can get it. If you got questions, you can hit me up, and I can help you get to where you need to go. So that's it. So there's the book. I plan to do little hits on this, sit down just either individually or with chiefs out there who have read it, and just do little pieces of this going forward. But I really hope you guys find value out of this. Definitely, it's a living document, as I put in the introduction, right? This is kind of a vessel that needs to be replenished, and it gets replenished. It was really written by the Chiefs Mess, and I hope it serves you well. All right, until next time, I'll see you later.